Okay, and welcome to HSE's PowerPoint. You're always connected. Sorry guys, I'm fumbling over here because I'm a little bit flustered. Okay, the purpose, the course outcome is so that the purpose of this course is to give trainees, proper understanding of how to approach and do a proper risk assessment together with the job safety analysis, as well as how to write a feedback report on how it should be presented. Knowledge outcome. After studying this course, trainees will be able to discuss the following: the need for and purpose of the risk assessments, the legal requirements in terms of risk assessments, certain terminology in respect of risk assessments, how to use a typical risk assessment matrix, the content of a typical risk assessment model. Introduction. Why must we do risk assessments? It is a legislative requirement. It is a moral obligation to stay in business for insurance purposes, but most importantly, to ensure all measures are in place to prevent injuries on your site. The OSH Act and Regulations requirement, legislative requirements, Section 8(1)(d), establish the hazards attached to any work performed, any article, substance produced, processed, handled, stored, or transported. General regulations, safety, evaluate risks attached to activities, conditions, persons are exposed to in the course of their employment. When to reassess? What is reassessment? The initial one, which could be regarded as a baseline. That is when your files are given to you by management, you normally have baseline risk assessments in place. It indicates the status of the health and safety situation. Reassessments have to take place when there is reason to believe or suspicion that the previous one is no longer valid, when changes have been made in terms of the process, equipment, procedures, substances, etc. Normally, you change your baseline to site-specific as soon as you start your processes on site. Failure to do that is because you're not paying attention to the process or you're not looking at the methodology. Highly likely, you're not consulting with management and foreman supervision on site, including your safety reps, and also make sure that you guys include the labor that is on site. They have more valuable input to your risk assessment than you honestly believe they would. The moral obligation. Your moral obligations are determined by the common law. A reasonable employer should foresee what could affect the health and safety of a person and to what extent that could be. Implement measures to eliminate or to manage the hazards that have been foreseen. Guys, also don't forget, when you're implementing to eliminate your hazards, try and go beyond what the eye sees. Walk around your site. It's so important when you walk around your site because as a safety officer on site, you can honestly foresee something that a foreman may miss at some point. Your OSH Act is driven by reasonably, practicability, see definition thereof, scope and severity of hazards, measures to be implemented, suitability of measures, the cost thereof. A risk assessment has to be done before the definition can be applied. Other reasons include to maintain a sustainable business. Productivity could suffer from people being injured, damage to property, or broken equipment. Reputation of the employer is at stake. Let's not forget, your reputation as a safety officer is also at stake. Insurance purposes. The higher the risk for the insurance company, the higher that premium is to be paid. I'd also like to throw into that as when you have more than one incident on site, your insurance premiums also go up. They don't just wait for annual increases, they also increase as per incidents that go up on, that increase on your site. Terminology, a danger. It is anything that may cause injury or damage to persons or property. This is a clear indication that the OSH Act does not only provide for the health and safety of people, but also for damage that might occur to property. Why? Because the chance for people to be affected when damage occurs to property is good. A hazard. It is a source of danger or exposure to danger. A danger becomes a hazard when persons are exposed thereto. A danger is technically also a hazard because source of danger equals hazard. Risk, it is the probability that injury or damage will occur. There's somebody speaking in the background, please mute. A risk assessment should therefore at least address the following: exposure of people to dangers, sources of dangers that may cause damage to property. Different risks. Risks could be associated with injury or illness to people, damage to property, effects on the environment, productivity, cost, insurance, reputation. Risk assessors. Who is entitled to do risk assessments? The persons who are competent to do it. They could be in-house persons. It could be a specialist from outside the company. Risk assessment model, your RAM, the assembly of a team. All persons must be competent to carry out a risk assessment. What does that mean? They must be conversant with the applicable legislation. Any non-compliance with a legal requirement has the potential to injury, illness, damage to property, plus the possibility for production loss, reputation, and insurance costs to be affected. The assembly of a team, they must be conversant with company rules and standards. They must be conversant with the process and equipment. They must be conversant with procedures and job specs. They must be properly prepared. They must understand the methodology being used. And guys, let's not forget, methodology, the guys would normally know during your induction, also during your morning DSTIs when the foreman is explaining all the hazards related to the task. And if task changes, the foreman will notify you. He'll also notify you of the hazards being changed. You must also then re-look at your risk assessment at that point in time. If you haven't added the change of task to your risk assessment, then do so the minute the foreman has prepared you or notified you that there is change to task and more hazards have been added to the risk for that specific task. Failing to do that, guys, should you have an incident on your site, you stand in the fire line. Proper planning. The risk assessment team must envisage what will be addressed. Proper planning at least entails to be conversant with applicable legislation, to be conversant with procedures, person-to-job specs, etc. To become conversant with the equipment, process, and activities. To establish if contractors would do work in the relevant area, to understand the methodology to be used to ensure that the same language is spoken. Again, when the guys are explaining during DSTI the methodology of the task and the hazards relating to the tasks, at some point going forward, methodology can change. Again, I remind you, once methodology has been changed, the hazards changes. Once the hazards change, your risk assessment must be changed. Failing to do that, you stand in the line of fire. Apart from standing in the line of fire, guys, then it means you haven't covered or you haven't put all measures in place for the hazards relating to the task. Risk value. It is a value in percentage to indicate the need for measures to either eliminate, reduce, or control identified hazards as required by Section 8 of the OSH Act 93. It is calculated as follows. Risk value equals probability, severity, frequency. Probability. It is the likelihood that exposure to danger, which is a hazard, will occur. It covers a range from 1 to 5. Highly improbable, less than an even chance, improbable, probable, almost certain, or inevitable. You then choose which relates to the risk or the hazard related to your task. Also make sure that when you put these in place, please guys, make sure that you got a column on your risk assessment. And I'll show you a risk assessment relating to a task. If it's almost certain to happen, you put precautionary measures in place that will make it less likely to happen. Severity. This is the degree to which the hazard might affect the following: injury or illness and damage to property. Cost. That includes cost to injuries or illnesses, property, productivity, the environment, reputation, or whatever other aspects are included under severity. Productivity, environment. Frequency. It is the rate at which the hazard would be presented, or how often the hazard would be present. Your frequency index, hazard arises every 5 years, hazard arises once a year, hazard arises once a month, hazard arises once a week, hazard is permanently present. If the hazard arises once a week, guys, then maybe you should re-look at putting extra measures in place. If it's there permanently, maybe you need to change the methodology to try and eliminate the hazard that's present. And guys, let me remind you, as safety officers, you are not magicians to do your work without management. If the hazard is permanently present, make sure that you notify management that something needs to be put in place. You can all sit around the table and voice what it is that can be put in place. Nobody should be excluded, including your laborers, because I find that the laborers have more valuable input in helping you eliminate hazards that are permanently present. Steps to a risk assessment. Identify all members participating in doing the risk assessment. Know the applicable legislation. Have knowledge of plant procedures, equipment, and person-to-job specs. Health and safety reps must participate. Ensure you understand your risk procedure. Ensure you know the methodology and processes involved when doing your risk assessment. Ensure all hazards are identified to the task at hand. Your health and safety system should indicate your stats and not the other way around. That's my talk for risk assessments. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Trust this session was informative and hope you enjoyed. If anybody wants to add, this is now your moment of joining in the group.
Hi, Lynn. Thank you very much. If I just may add my 2 cents in this process. You know, in the past, I identified with regards to risk assessments. Many of us do not consider the user manual that sorry, my mic was off. Excuse me. I was mentioning that what I experienced in the past was that many a time we conduct risk assessments and nobody looks at the user manual of the equipment. We had an incident in the past where guys were working with a magnetic base drill, and it clearly defined that you should not have or use gloves during the activity. But because the client was enforcing it, this was many years back, obviously we complied with the client's requirements for using it. But after we had an incident, we went back to the user manual and we actually identified that they mentioned to not utilize gloves during the activity. So again, it's just the lessons learned from my side that it's very, very important, it's critical actually to look at the user manuals of the equipment that's also been utilized. And a lot of these suppliers actually have risk assessments themselves within the document that you can utilize to assist you as well with the development of your risk assessment. So that's just my 2 cents that I wanted to add to this discussion as well, relating to risk assessments. But thank you, Lynn. From my side, thank you very much.
No problem. I quite enjoyed. I hope everybody enjoyed this session with me and is more informed as to how to, you know, generate your risk assessment and not wait for a last minute, you know, to do the risk assessment. And I will relate to an incident that had occurred on a site that I was already off, where information wasn't put onto a risk assessment. And after there was a fatality, they discovered that apart from theft happening on site, things like that was not put on the risk assessment. And, you know, the safety officer was actually in the line of fire during that period. And guys, even if that is the case, if you experience theft, make sure that you add that to your risk assessment. If you fail to do that, you're the first person they come to and the first person they put in the line of fire. And you need to cover yourself. It's not just about covering yourself, it's about putting all the measures in place. And that's the importance of your risk assessment. It also saves not just the company reputation, but it saves your reputation. And, you know, to take shortcuts and to bypass things that is important is a no-go for me. And we can all learn through these little segments that we're having, these little sessions that we're having, because if you don't add it to your risk assessment, again, I'm going to say, you have a crack in your system. And, you know, the one thing your documents do is show your competence in the way you carry your work or the way you conduct your work. And for me, that is key to the work that we do, is the way you conduct your work, the way you carry your paperwork, and how you carry your paperwork. So please, guys, let's just go out there and do the best that we know how. Nandi, I see you raised your hand.
Yes, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, I don't know if I understand you correctly. On our side, we have a hand roller. So apparently they can steal this kind of equipment. So we should, what you are saying is that we should put it in our risk assessment as well, that theft can occur and measures must be put in place.
Nandi, this. Sorry,
Okay.
carry on.
No, you can carry on.
Okay, there's two things you do with the hand roller. Number one is your safe operating procedure. With your safe operating procedure, it tells you how to use that hand roller. It also, in your safe operating procedure, should have the hazards relating to that. You do a risk assessment for your safe operating procedure. That is one document on its own. The next document that comes with the risk assessment is the task at hand. And when you're doing the task at hand, for instance, if you're doing excavation and you're using the hand roller, then you put there on that risk assessment for the task, the use of your hand roller, and remember, everything has a hazard related to it. And make sure you mention your equipment, make sure you mention whatever plant you're using for that excavation risk assessment, and put your measures in place to try and eliminate the risks relating to that task. So don't forget, your hand roller has two: safe operating procedure, and then whatever task is at hand, make sure you add that plant or equipment to the risk assessment. Okay, I got two other people that's raised their hand. Can I see the first one?
It's me. Hi,
Joseph.
Lynn. Hi, Lynn. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
Brilliant presentation. I wanted to find out, are you going to show us the template for the risk assessment? I've got a question with regards to the frequency part of the risk.
Okay, let me just share my screen.
Okay.
Uh, sorry, guys. You know, I've got a very busy computer. I will just go to any risk assessment that I would do, just so that I can show you. I'll go to a very old one.
Okay.
Please remember, I've updated my risk assessments. These are just old ones, and I'll take, let's go excavations.
Okay, maybe while you're trying to open, I've had an incident where a hydraulic oil went through someone's hand, and then from experience, a mechanic guy says in 30 years it has never happened. It was more like it's the first time this thing happens. So now I would like us to discuss the effect of frequency. If it could happen in 30 years' time, but the effect of it happening, it's quite, or the severity is quite high, then what is the effect of the frequency in a risk assessment?
Okay, if it's very high, I would put, look, what's the damage? What's the damage? Is the damage to the person or to the environment? Because when you say, sorry, let me just finish, Joseph.
Okay.
When you say it got onto their hand, okay? Now, on their hand, hydraulic oil doesn't injure you on your hand unless something has penetrated your skin.
Yeah, what really happened is the hydraulic oil went through the hand to the other side. And then it is said it has never happened in 30 years. So now when you have a high severity, but this thing takes like 50 years to happen, what is the effect of this 30 years in controlling the risk or assessing or controlling the risk?
Okay.
Can I jump in 1 second here? Joseph, it's very important what you mentioned, because a lot of the time companies don't look at the historical data according to incidents that have occurred when they're drafting up risk assessments.
Yes.
So that was something that I appreciated with Murray and Roberts, that one of the points that was raised within the calculation that we done was historical information resulting from an incident. So within the database of the company, was there ever an incident that resulted from this activity? And if it was yes, they looked at the frequency as to how many times it happened, the severity, which automatically gave it a higher rating. So, we as safety people, it's bad to say, but we really push by numbers, because you have qualitative and you have quantitative ways and measures of determining high, mediums, and lows. So that's another thing that I'm also trying to get people to stop thinking of only, okay, this is considered as a high risk because the rating says it's high. But something can have a high potential or high severity, and then because of the other calculations that are done, it's seen as a low, then no major mitigations are put in place to control that thing. But if the outcome of that thing becomes a lost time injury or fatality, etc., we should be focusing on that area, irrelevant whether it's seen as a low, medium, or high. And then also considering the factors, how many times in a day or in a month or in a week, etc., are we exposed to this? How many people are exposed to it also plays a role, because you can have one person exposed to this activity in 6 months. So the severity might be high and the probability might be low, but when that activity takes place, we still need to ensure that proper mitigations are in place during that activity taking place as well. So all of those aspects need to be considered. And that's the thing. I mean, we must I know I'm speaking to the converted, but we really need to go away from only looking at the numbers and being governed by numbers, because reality speaking is that, you know, with your 5x5 risk matrices, for an example's sake, a lot of the times you find that your ratings are low, even though the severity is high
Yes.
potential. You're
Mm.
still getting low scores. So everybody looks at it and say, okay, this is a low risk, so we shouldn't really focus. Let's take it as low as reasonably practicable. But the reality is that the risk matrix, because of a 5x5 scenario, makes it low. Doesn't mean that it is low. You
Is
know,
low.
so
Yeah.
it's just one of those debatable ones, because a lot of companies prefer the 5x5s, and in my opinion, the 4x4s and the 3x3s give you a little bit of a better, let's say, a more realistic rating than like your 5x5s, etc. So again, it's open to discussion. I think that's a good topic, and I'm happy that you raised it. But I think that historical data is very, very important in determining as well the severity and the risk impact to the workers.
Thank you.
Thanks for that, Fabian. I see another hand raised. Reginald?
Morning, everybody. Thanks, Lynn, for the presentation. It was very informative, and it brought back some basics to some of us who has forgotten it. So thank you for that. I just want to comment on Joseph's and add on to Fabian's statements that he made, and bring back to your presentation regarding having the right people around the table when doing the risk assessment. Now, sometimes we are only limited to the operators and the foremen that are around, and their experience to guide us with the ratings. That's why it's important sometimes to network in this, chat to other safety professionals on how often has these incidents happened in their area, or is there any risks or problems that happen with these operations. Because although to his specific circumstances, his advisor said it happened once in 30 years, but you'll find out if you maybe check with Fabian or some other guys that it's quite a common incident when you're talking to mechanics or people that's dealing with hydraulic machinery. So but that's the limitation, unfortunately, with sometimes with the RAs, is that the advice around the table governs your ratings. That's why it's so important sometimes not to only focus on ratings, but also look at the job itself. You know what I mean? And we can sense the dangers. You shouldn't be always governed by the RA rating sheet. So you know that or your exposure might drop the rating, or the number of injuries that happen might drop the rating, but you know yourself this is a high risk activity, and we need to focus on it. Unfortunately, management who are driven by program tend to look at ratings and say, you know what, you have rated it such, so we only focus at the top 5 high rating risks. You know what I mean? And that's unfortunate, because some production managers are not experienced enough or understand the importance of the safety officer's advice. So you got a tool that guides you, but again, it's a tool, and it's important to have some common sense on it. You're dealing with piping. You're dealing with piping under pressure, piping that wears under time, and it can burst. And if people are handling these pipes while under pressure, the risk of it penetrating hands or penetrating bodies is high. You know what I mean? Although the frequency might tell you something else based on the people that you've got advice on regarding your risk ratings. So yeah, risk ratings, just be careful when we're working with it, because it's a guideline, and we should also look at, as Lynn says, go out to the field, look at it, and see if your risk rating makes sense to what you actually put on the paper, you know. And then the other point that Vanessa also picked up was the communication. I see on a chat she wrote about communicating of the RA. It's vital, you know. Sometimes we get into these RAs, and depending on your clients, some clients want the whole activity on one RA, not broken up into sections. So you end up with like a 52-page RA. And now you take a 52-page RA and you try and communicate it to the workforce. And some professionals think if they read through the RA, they've done their job and they've signed the register. But it's not such. So you need to look at proper ways of communicating large RAs at times as well. Maybe breaking it down into sections. Look at the 3-week roll ahead plan on your work or the week roll ahead plan in your work, and take out aspects from your RA that the employees are going to be dealing with at that specific week and communicate those things, you know what I mean, with them. So you get the message across to the worker, because you must understand the level of understanding between us as professionals who draw up RAs and your audience at the end of the day who actually needs to understand this RA. It's two different levels of people in a lot of industries. And I sometimes talk, my more experience is construction. I know the other sectors, there's more, the education levels are much higher of understanding in between the different levels of workforce. But when I look at my experience of constructions, there's huge difference between levels of understanding due to education gaps. So we must be very careful that we when we're talking, we understand the audience, and then it goes back to your knowledge you get from trainer, which you can use when you're communicating RAs, is to understand your audience, understand the level of education, understand what will grasp their concepts or keep them interested in what you're saying, because sometimes you can talk for hours and nobody's listening to you. So just be aware of that as well when communicating with RAs. My last point is, when we do a lot of investigations regarding incidents, and I go to my sites and then we go through the documentation, I like always taking the DSTI and the RA first and analyzing that before we start the investigation. And you'll see that 9 out of 10, that specific incident that happened is not covered in that RA. And when you find out sometimes the root cause of it is that a safety officer has to do the RA by himself in the office. There's no guidelines being given to him from any other staff. And the job needs to start tomorrow, and he gets asked at 5 o'clock that afternoon to drop an RA for a job that starts 5 o'clock in the morning. And he puts together whatever he thinks under his experience and knowledge to put together in the RA. And it's normally a cut, copy, paste of Lynn gave me an RA, Joseph gave me an RA, put it all together, and here we go. You know what I mean? So be careful of that. Yes, you're pleasing the production team, but your responsibility as a registered professional, be careful of that. Because if it's a serious incident that happens, you're going to be taken to task, as Lynn said, because you've created this RA, and they're going to ask you whose input to try and get more, to take the responsibility off you, and you're going to find out, no, sorry, I did it myself. And you're going to need to answer. So be careful of that trap that we normally find ourselves. These things happen.
Thanks.
Sure.
Oh, that's true, Reg. Thanks for that, sir.
Thanks, Reginald. Very informative. And again, guys, the one thing I know is that I am constantly fighting with management. But at the end of the day, I will have my way. For the simple reason, it's not just about protecting myself, but it's making sure that I'm protecting the workers on site. Remember, when you're doing your risk assessment, guys, especially with your ratings, no management, I don't care who the safety manager is, I don't care who the CEO is, I don't care who your site agent is. Your risk assessment is never wrong. So if you feel like putting a rating of 5 because of the high frequency or the high severity or whatever the probability, if you feel like putting high numbers there, you are not wrong. As long as you can justify why you've put your frequency right there, management cannot come and change it for you. It is your risk assessment. You're covering yourself, you're covering the company, you're covering the employees, but more importantly, you are putting measures in place. And like Reginald says, you got so many different people on your site with so many levels of education. And also, let's not forget the illiterate that is on your site. You have to communicate. For me, I use translators. I use my subcontractors' safety. I use pictures. I have now come to a point in my risk assessments, my toolbox talks, all my documentation, whereby you will understand the task at hand and the hazards related to the task. And I'm so glad to say that because of my continuous fight with them and continuously speaking to them and reminding them, today I feel so comfortable going to site. Okay, not during lockdown, but I'm so comfortable going to site because I know up to my operator will come before I leave work. If a subcontractor tries to hide an incident on site, even he will report it to me because why? He knows it's not about a blame game. It's all about putting proper measures in place and making sure that you have a documentation that speaks volumes for the hazards related to all the tasks on your site. Thank you, guys. Really, it was an awesome session for me.
Thank you, everybody. Much appreciated for your times and everyone's efforts. Thanks, Lynn, once again. And yeah, we'll see you all at the next one, ladies and gentlemen. Please have your questions available. And if you'll have any additional questions, please post them via WhatsApp and we'll do our best to answer them as well for you guys. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys. Have a good lockdown and enjoy and stay safe, please, guys.
Thank you, Lynn.
Pleasure.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Lynn. Very informative, girl. Thank you so much. Have a safe day.
You too, Vanessa. Right, guys. You can all end your meeting. Let me breathe.
Thank you so much.
Let me breathe. Thanks, guys. Love to all.
Bye. Thank you.